Hi, everyone, and welcome back to From Pain Point to On Point. I'm your host, Britt. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Espen Sjaavik, co founder of Alfred. So excited to have you on the podcast, Espen. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, before we really dive into what we're going to talk about today, which I'm really excited about our topic, we wanted to chat about sales as a science and getting back to the foundation and getting back to the structural elements that really help sales teams scale. I want to know a little bit about your background as a sales leader. You have scaled teams from like single digits into the hundreds. You've worked at places from Gartner to Zscaler. You have such experience. Talk to me a little bit about that sales experience. And also, I'd love to know how that led to you creating Alfred and give us a little background on what Alfred is and how Alfred helps sales leaders.
Absolutely happy to do so. So I started my career selling in the very infancy of the career in B2C and B2S and B, before eventually joining Gartner and selling research and advisory. From there, I went on to work for four different software companies, four different US software companies: Bazaar Voice, AppDynamics, CyberReason, and Zscaler. And the common denominator across these companies is that they have a very mindset, like very athlete like mindset when it comes to driving sales in terms of focusing on improvement, constantly focusing on your role is more than just a job, like your sales role is more than just a job. It's something that you dedicate yourself towards when it comes to improving yourself. This mindset of 1% better every day, which sounds like a cliche, but it's true for the best. And that's where I've spent a majority of, if not my entire career, actually, in software. And I've worked with some incredible people that I've learned so much from. Um, so yeah, that's me.
Nice. Give us a little bit of what Alfred does. I'd love to know what you're working on right now and why you decided to create Alfred.
I will. So after leaving Zscaler, so like you mentioned, Zscaler, and going from a very small team to a very large team. So I started off as leading the Benelux team first at Zscaler, and then I took on the Nordics, and then I took on the UK, and then Middle East and Africa, and eventually my team was about is in the three-digit number of quota carrying sellers and 21 different first line leaders and almost I think seven or eight second and third line leaders between me and the team. It became a very big operation, and I left that in a couple of years ago. But what I saw in the time at Zscaler was how this playbook driven and athlete driven way of enabling people worked from a first line leader perspective, from a second line, and from a third line, etc. So I felt like I had quite a lot to offer when I came into the startup and scale up environment in the Nordics. In the summer of 2024, I started consulting with a lot of startups and scale ups. And every time I spoke to a CEO or a CRO, I ended up getting offers from them saying, like, hey, come and work here, come and bring this to me because I have a pain exactly in this point. I need you to come and help me solve sales or go to market related challenges. And I didn't want to start working for somebody directly. So I said, like, hey, let me think about how I can help you. So I took that idea back and I met Edvin, my co-founder, and we decided to figure out a way to democratize this knowledge and make it come to life in the workflow of every seller. Basically bring the knowledge and bring the habits and bring the skills of the elite performing sellers into the workflow of every single seller and sales leader out there. So that's how the idea of Alfred came about in the first place. Since then, we've recruited a really good team. We're four co-founders, so Amr and Alexandra as well on the engineering and product side, and we have three fantastic engineers that we're working with. And right now we have the first handful plus of paying customers and about 55 pilots running at this moment. So we've just starting to come out of private beta, so it's an exciting time.
That is so exciting. Oh my gosh. What was it like trying to start this is going a little bit off of our beaten path of questions, but just curious to know what it was like for you to start your own company and kind of take that challenge on.
So different. And I have the utmost respect for people that manage to build their own from nothing. So to everybody out there is listening, if you've started something yourself and, made it happen, congrats and like kudos to you. Because I think the biggest difference between having an established brand and an established product and an established place to start is I mean, it would be wrong to say the biggest difference. Like everything is different. In my past, I would have people around me to lean on, to delegate things to get help from. Right now, I am all the roles in go-to-market. I am all the roles in marketing. I am all the roles in evangelism. So essentially, you end up having to not just, lay the plan, but also you're working the plan, you're also evaluating the plan, you're making the plan. Like you're doing everything around that. So that's the biggest difference, which is fun and difficult, and I guess rewarding. That's eventually it'll be rewarding. Hopefully, let's see.
And I guess it's rewarding too. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think it will be. I have high hopes. I think if you're at the helm, you guys are in good hands because you seem to know what you're doing, Espen.
We'll see.
All right, let's dive into some of the questions that we had discussed, some of the questions that we wanted to talk about today. We got a lot of stuff to get through, and all of it is kind of meaty. So, um, one of the things that we had talked about was AI and kind of the explosion of AI and what that's really doing to sales teams across the board, across all industries. But I think that we're seeing it mainly in software and technology companies. Um, what type of pressure does that put on sales leadership, just in general?
So I think there's a few things in that question, but I think if you're talking about overall right now, the general hype in the industry, because there's a lot of hype. First of all, yes, AI is the future, and everything is going in that direction. And AI is fundamentally different from many things in how software has been sold to and consumed by companies in the past. And the biggest difference being that software has been built for humans to do jobs that were previously done manually, but do it in a software tool. So basically, humans would be carrying that, the context from system to system and doing their work in the system, whereas now AI is doing the work for them. So it's a fundamental shift. I think right now, the most recent days, we've seen a big shift in SaaS right now in terms of the sell-off in the markets. If you're talking about the stock market, then yes, there is a downturn. I think that uh, right now, for as long as there are humans that are going to be buyers, though. So if you think about the listeners of this podcast, if there are humans that are buyers, I think there's going to be humans that are sellers. There will still be a need for human sellers, and there will still be, those human moments that matter, that exchange the trust between buyer and seller. They will still remain. And I'm generally an AI optimist, so that yes, there's a lot of pressure on sales leadership right now because of these hype stories where you see the units, the metrics that some AI companies are posting. They're so mind-blowingly impressive,
Yeah.
like where you have 0 to 100 million in a few months or 0 to 200 million in a few months. It forces investors to ask boards, hey, why aren't you doing this? And what are you doing to, compete with this? And then the boards put that pressure on the sales leaders, or first of all, on the CEOs, and the CEOs on the sales leaders. So every sales leader has to come up with a story and a plan to drive productivity. That's really it. Because you're not going to just snap your fingers and then have productivity just happen. So the pressure is on to drive productivity per input. So what I keep hearing from customers is they need to go from, say, $1 million of productivity per rep to $1.5 million per rep. I actually had this conversation with somebody today. So really, if you think about it, taking a step back to engineering sales and what it looks like, if you think about sales as a revenue factory, in order to do this, you need to have the productivity factors under control. You need, as a sales leader, to own you need to have an intimate understanding of what's your average ticket size, your average order value, what's your sales cycle length, what are your win rates. And then if you think about, again, sales as a revenue framework, then you have to increase the upper limit of work in progress that any seller can carry at any given time, so that you can essentially create more output per unit of inputs, essentially improving that throughput in the machine. So in short, I know it's a long answer going in many directions, but in short, you need to give your sellers processes, habits, and tools that give them time back and help them sell bigger deals faster. And I think that's really difficult. That's why it's a pressure point for
Yeah.
sales leaders.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely something that we're feeling, which is that sales leaders are expected to have a higher productivity, have a higher output from their teams with either the same amount of headcount or in some cases even with less headcount because teams are being laid off in favor of other AI tools that are coming in. that they
Hmm.
want to use to replace SDRs, BDRs, sellers, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think jobs are changing. I think to be honest, I see more jobs changing as opposed to people being laid off. And I think it's more like if somebody leaves, then the sales leader is expected to keep the number, but with a lower team. It's not necessarily. I haven't seen. I don't know. Maybe you have other data, but I haven't seen too many examples of people being axed and to be replaced by AI in sales. I think even AI solutions and even the AI natives, and I'm talking to many of them on a daily basis. Even the AI natives with the most impressive growth numbers, they still have human sellers selling human to human, and they still need to improve sales performance. So it's true for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I was speaking to another person yesterday who's a sales coach, and his entire philosophy is really about sales is human. Sales is really about um, caring for your customer and having that care and curiosity for your customer and wanting to solve their problems, and less about kind of hitting your target and more about like being curious of how to help this person. I kind of see the pendulum swinging when it comes to AI, moving more towards that direction and less of it being, how much blood can we squeeze from the stone, and more of like, how can we level up our sales teams to have more genuine connections with their customers. Let's leverage AI to the best of our ability to help with process and structure and documentation and that type of stuff. But let's train our sales team to be these very curious, very human sellers.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it's all, I mean, sales is first and foremost, you're helping your champions solve problems that matter to them. That's why you're there in the first place. You do that by having pure intentions first and foremost. It starts with intention. If your intention is to help the other person solve a problem that they have, and you have taken the time to sit down, first of all, like your marketing department or your RevOps team or whatever, have sat down and thought about who are really the ICP companies and the ICP personas that have problems that we understand that we can solve. And you find sellers that actually care about helping these people solving these exact problems, then I think that's a very good start. And if you start from that point and you manage to build the conviction within the sellers, if you help your sellers really build conviction around your ability, your product's ability, or your company's ability to help these champions solve the problems, then you're in a good spot. So if you think about the two key words here being intention and conviction, I think intention starts with you've got to have people that have high moral standards and the integrity to actually go and care about solving these problems. I think that's a very good, basic factor to think about. And then if you help your sellers build convictions so that they understand how their solution is going to solve the business problems of that champion or that person you're trying to sell to, then so many things are forgiven in how you sell and how you go to market because people gravitate towards people that show conviction and that are genuinely curious and eager to help them solve a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, but that being said, sales is still a process, right? We still have this structure that we have to follow, and we still have targets to hit, at the end of the day. So despite having the best intention and the conviction in the solutions that you're selling, there's still this element of, you know, I have a number to hit. So in your experience, I would love to know, where do you find that productivity for sales teams starts to break down? I think especially in times of complex orgs, and also in these times where the pressure is really intense, the pressure is really on.
The way I understand the question is like, where does it start to become unpredictable what's happening? Where
Yeah.
does productivity break down? So I'm understanding is to lead towards
Yeah.
predictability. I think productivity, think about it as when pressure is on, the natural reaction from leadership. Let's say you have a quarter that you're about to miss, or you just missed a quarter and you just started a new quarter. I think the natural reaction for a lot of people, sales leaders, myself included, in the past, is to just like, let's do more, let's do faster, let's just go, 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 and let's just pile on more. And I think the what's happening. I mean, I don't want to take it back to AI and automation at this point, but I think a lot of times right now it's just like, how can we just like get more top of funnel, make more noise in the market? And I think productivity really is it's a vector quantity, meaning it has both direction and speed, not just speed, it has direction as well. But I think sometimes the answer isn't more, sometimes the answer is better. Sometimes the answer is to slow down a little bit and go deeper and be more, coming back to what I just said previously, more intentional, building more conviction, making sure that we were focusing on the right things. But this is really difficult because in times of high stress, the leader then has to, first of all, diagnose the problem accurately and be able to say, hey, here's the situation, here is the actual problem. You have to be able to pinpoint that problem, and not just pinpoint the problem, but you also then need to enable the team to fix that problem, or you need to go and fix it yourself. So I think very often when you start to see issues, essentially the result is for many people just to try to like be more like a gung-ho type of leader and just like rah rah, let's go. But doing more isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. So I like to think about it as, take a step back, focus on the things that you can control, like what's within like diagnosing the situation, then figuring out what's within your control, what's within your sphere of influence, and what is it that you can't do anything about. And then you start from the middle and you work your way out.
Hmm. So how would a sales leader know that the issue that they're having with their team is, a quality problem or like a process or a fundamental problem? How would they be able to determine the difference between we just need to have we need to be doing more so we can have a more full pipe versus we've got a real quality problem here? How does a sales leader differentiate
Well, first of all, this is a huge question, which we could spend a couple of days debating because it's so many
that?
different. It could be so many different things leading up to a problem with pipeline quality, right? So I think what you're asking here is like, what are the leading, or like what signals tell you that there's an issue with quality, not just a motivation problem. I think I just had a conversation with the CRO this morning, and he told me that he came in to a company, and one of the first things that he did was that he essentially removed it was a mid-sized company, like removing $10 million of pipeline and just like deleting it as closed, lost, no decision. It was a huge blow for the CEO and founder of the company, right? But so I asked him, like, why did you do it? And of course, like, I think it's very natural why he did it, because there was no common qualification methodology applied to the deals. There's no common language, nor common sort of like entry and exit criteria that were established between the stages. So it basically created this pipeline which nobody could really explain why the deals were there in the first place. And now also just in defense of this particular CRO, he didn't just come and delete the deals, but they also went in to actually figure out, of course, and qualify and understand what was going on. So the thing what had happened is that somebody had put in a deal because they were kind of like hoping it was going to happen. They thought maybe it would happen, but they didn't have any clear boundaries in terms of like, hey, what is it really that defines a deal that is stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3, depending on how you actually qualify or like how you run your pipeline and you manage your own pipeline. So one of the first things that he did was to establish a common language with common criteria to what constitutes a qualified deal. For example, what constitutes something that is a commit deal in your forecast? What constitutes best case in your forecast? What are the things that we're looking for in terms of signal from the customer? So if I was to like bring this back to my own experience, I always bring it back to, qualification frameworks, bring it back to medics. So do we understand the pain? Do we understand why they're engaging with us in the first place? Do we have a champion? Do we understand how they're going to buy and who makes the decision? And have we met that person? Have we met the economic buyer? What are their criteria? And what's the process for evaluation that they need to go through? So if we can't answer those questions for deals that are, for example, late stage in the forecast, then those would be clear signals that we have a problem that's, pretty process or fundamental. But if I take it down to a different type of deals, if I'm thinking about more transactional businesses, let's say you have some of the people that have shorter sales cycles, like 1, 2, 3 meeting sales cycles or smaller ticket sizes, I would look at the top of funnel metrics. So I would go back to like conversion from cold call to first meeting, or from the cold call to the demo and demo to close, for example. And I would say if we're granted that the quantities, like the base level quantity is there, and this applies to both of the situations that I just described, granted that the quantity is there, if we're struggling on those things, then I would probably think it's a problem with either the ICPs, so the people we're calling on, or the messaging, the value and pain messaging that we're bringing to these people, because it's hard to cut through the noise and be relevant, right? There's so much noise in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you talked about that I want to go back to is something that you spoke about at our kickoff. Spoiler, listeners, Espen was at our sales kickoff earlier this year, but having a common language. And I think this is something that you spoke about when you spoke to the sales screen team that really resonated with me in so deeply. And it was actually not even because of anything that you said. I'm sorry, Espen, but it was your co-founder, Alex. She works in product, correct? She heads product. And, she kind of spoken up and said that this common language is so important, not just for the sales team, but for the entire company, because it really lets you understand so deeply what the customer needs. And you have a, you actually have a real framework that everybody is working off of then. Um, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of this shared language and how that kind of has a ripple effect across the entire organization?
I can, but why did it resonate so deeply with you?
Because I'm not in sales.
Exactly.
Because I'm in marketing, but I work very closely with product, and very often it can feel a little bit like a black box. And I think that goes both ways. I think that product can feel like a black box. And when we're talking about certain things, that's it maybe not resonating as strongly as it could with the sales team or with our CS team. And I think it goes the other way with sales and CS into product and marketing. So I think having a, a very common language that we all use is something that for me feels very vital, especially as somebody that is like taking information from one end of the spectrum and moving it to the other end of the spectrum and trying to kind of explain products and process and nuance and all of that good stuff.
At the end of the day, why are we here? We're here in obviously not in as humans, but why are we here in tech, right?
To get really existential with this
And
podcast.
we're not that at that level yet. But why are we here? We're here to solve problems for customers. And if you think about why does the organization exist? The organization exists to produce stuff that the sales team then uses to solve problems for customers. Coming back to this point. Now, the challenge exists if you think about an typical organizational chart is that you have the sales team, they have their tool stack in their language, marketing have their tool stack in their language, tech teams and product teams have their tool stack in their language. And we don't understand each other. We don't understand each other across these different functions. So I think unless the organization has a unified way of communicating when it comes to how do we produce like what value for our customers, like what are the problems that we solve? How does an ideal customer look like? What are problems that we solve for these customers and how do we solve them? How do we solve them differently? Where have we done it before? Essentially, sort of like a value framework, value messaging. Or you can think about messaging like using the SPICE framework, for example, about the situation and the problem that the customer has and the impact that you guys are seeking to deliver. I think that needs to be understood across the company because ultimately our artificial way of organizing resources per org charts doesn't matter to customers. An organization is really just like a network of projects that exists in order to deliver value for customers. So why common language? I mean, for reasons that I just mentioned, but also because it really, if you think about common language within the sales function specifically and how that benefits the entire organization, because I think everybody in the organization is in sales, it removes subjectivity. It basically removes, or it helps to remove rose tinted glasses or sandbagging from a forecasting perspective. It also allows you to onboard new people more easily because you can teach them what it looks like, what the expectations are. It's common ground. So it's just like anything else. If you have two doctors trying to diagnose a patient and one of them happens to be an electrician, not a doctor, the other one happens to be a plumber, is also not a doctor, they're not going to use medical language to diagnose that patient and the patient isn't going to get the right treatment, right? So I think the coaching then also shifts and the ability for the leaders to basically upskill and up-level the teams really shifts because you get clearer expectations, faster feedback, repeatability across the team. You can create more of that rhythm around the team. So you move from gut feel leadership and gut feel, hey, this feels like it's X or this feels like it's Y, to something that's more factual.
To your point earlier, something that's a little bit more predictable.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. Another thing that you talked about that I really liked during the kickoff was talking about generally scalability and how you're able to scale a team, a process, a company, and how there are some organizations that are really focused on the star athlete mentality and hiring kind of like stellar salespeople and building off of that, which creates this really unstable upside down scalability triangle, right? Whereas if you're focused more on kind of the process and the structure, the shared language, and you build up from there, you're able to put whoever you need to into the mix and get them to
Mhm.
where you need them to be because you have this structure and process. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that?
No, absolutely. I think if you hire in the typical like superstar based culture, or you hire based on to like this a lot of companies, they hire for people's experience or networks experience. I mean, like industry experience or exposure to a certain customer set, or you hire them for their Rolodex essentially. Um, I think there's a huge challenge in that, obviously, because that's going to run out at some point. The Rolodex does run out at some point. Also, if you hire people that are typical like superstars, they all bring their own way of working and they all bring their own way of doing things into the mix. I think you have this saying that you should just hire great people and get out of their way. Like a lot of people say that that's like a good way to run the business. I think that is absolute bullshit. I think that's like if you bring the best athletes, like the best football players, onto a team, they should, in theory, win the league, right? They don't, because they need to have a shared vision. They need to have belief in that vision. They need to have an execution plan, how they're going to make that vision come to life. And they need to have enablement and training. They need day-to-day execution in order to make that happen. So essentially what they need is, instead of this upside down triangle where you have the superstar in the bottom and then, they pick their own ways of doing things and their own processes, which becomes destabilizing. They need a pyramid which starts with process and fundamentals in the bottom. Then you layer in the right training, the right enablement, the right support team, the right everything around it. And then you basically enable new hires and new people that come on board onto that way of working. And that's how you basically create repeatability and scalability.
Absolutely. This is kind of like a cheesy podcast question, but if there was a belief that sales leaders need to unlearn, what would you say that belief is?
To unlearn, I think it probably goes back to the previous question, which I think leaders are doing less and less of this right now. But I think every time you find yourself gravitating towards the easy solution of hiring people for their past successes and their past experience, then I think it should be a red flag, or at least an amber flag for yourself, to go up and say like, hey, this is probably not the right thing. Because I think past success doesn't equal future success for people that you're bringing on board on the teams, even if it's tempting. But you need to have a plan to, bring the right people on board and enable them with the knowledge that they need, with the habits that they need, with the skills that they need. And that's your role. And that's not going to change. Anytime you find yourself looking at just, hey, I'm going to bring some very experienced people and kind of get out of the way, then you're probably on the wrong path, I would say. I'm not sure if that
Yeah.
answered the question, but that's the first thing that comes to mind in terms of unlearning.
I'd love to kind of get in a glimpse inside what you coach. When you're coaching a sales team or when you're coaching individual sales reps, what are some of the most important things that you focus on in those coaching sessions? I think that a lot of times when sales leaders have a team and they're having one-on-ones or coaching sessions with their teams, they're thinking about what deal are you working on? What stage is it in? You know, do you need me to join a call? These very tactical questions. And I'm wondering what your approach is to coaching sales reps. And is that kind of the playbook that you follow when it comes to coaching, or do you focus on other skills or other behaviors or other elements?
There's no one size fits all, first of all. If you're coaching somebody, I think what's the framework and like what's the mindset that I look at the situation through. I think that's probably more useful to start there, so that I don't say like, hey, this is exactly how I do it. But what I think about first is like, do they first, let's say that the organization has a certain way of doing things and it's similar to the playbook that I'm used to working in, for example. If I look at an individual rep, I'm trying to understand, do they, first of all, are they committed to the vision, and do they have belief in what we're doing? Like, that's the first thing I'm trying to understand. Like, do they really believe? It starts with the person. Like, do they really believe in what we're trying to achieve? And do they see themselves and their role in what we're trying to achieve? If not, nothing else is going to stick anyway. So you have to start there. It has to start with belief. If they have belief and they also believe in the plan, then it becomes a question of enablement, because that's the glue between the plan and the execution, right? So then it becomes, okay, so what are this like smaller pieces within enablement? And then that's when I start thinking about, okay, do they buy into the way in which we would like them to do things? Like, do they buy into the process that we're driving when it comes to the operational rhythm that we're driving week by week? Do they buy into the way in which we operate in sales? So that would be, like one layer of the cake. And then the next thing I would go, let's say that they buy into all of that. Um, I try to assess and understand how is their messaging? Like, how do they, first of all, do they understand the problems that we're solving? Do they
Yeah.
understand the customer's problems? Do they understand a day in the life of this customer? I think it's important that people get trained on problems and not on our solution. So like, I basically try and understand their problem understanding first and foremost, because problem messaging much more efficient than solution messaging, because customers will recognize themselves in the problem and not in the solution. So customers will typically say, oh, I have that problem, but people don't say, oh, I would like that solution. They need to sort of like, that's a journey, that's further out. So focus on that early stage and try to understand where they see themselves. I think this is obviously like, again, one of those questions that can go in 1,000 directions. But what I try to initially, if I start working with somebody, and I'm assuming right now that it's somebody that's struggling a bit, given that I'm working with them, what is do they see themselves as part of that team, and do they buy into the way in which the team is executing? And if not, we'll stop there and I'll try to understand why not, and then we'll just talk about it and probably train them on some things and figure out if they would like to be on that team and on that journey, and see if they're willing to sort of like lean into developing, for example, the skills or habits that are required to close the gap.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's I I ask the question because I feel like all too often you get into a coaching session or one-on-one with a rep and it just turns into, okay, well, let's just look at pipe. Let's just see what you've got on deck. Let's see what deals you've got in the works and see how they need help, which can sometimes be a really great conversation, but a lot of the times just feels a little bit like listy, Okay, we're checking off this versus let's actually dig in and see where the real issues are, Um,
I think this is very often let's say it's a rep and a leader. This is a leadership problem, right? Where the leader again hasn't. It's one thing is it's on the rep to, like, really, really elite performers. They self-analyze and self-diagnose and understand, hey, I see myself. I hold the mirror up to myself and I can see that I have a conversion from new business meeting to qualified pipeline, which isn't good enough. And they start working on like, why is that? But quite often they can't see the exact patterns because they also don't have the lens that their leader has to see what others are doing, what's working, what's not working, and how it contrasts with other people on
Mhm.
the team. So what great leaders do is they really sit down and analyze the business of the rep based on leading indicators and based on essentially what are all the elements that needs to go into the sausage machine to eventually create that sausage on the other end. What are the elements in terms of how many do you need in quantity, and what's the quality that you need to put into this machinery? And if the leader doesn't take time to sit down and analyze this, they're not going to add value in terms of coaching for that rep. They're just going to basically be gravitating to talking about specific deals or next meetings, or basically becomes a forecast review. Whereas in reality, so the rep needs somebody to hold up the mirror and say, hey, I've been looking at this and I can see that you're actually spending, I don't know, 15 days longer in stage two compared to everybody else in the company. First of all, were you aware that you were doing that? No. Okay. But I've also looked at, like, if you were able to figure out a way to close this down, then you might be able to close another two deals in a year. And, let's think about how much of an impact that would be. Typically, the rep will go like, oh, holy holy shit, that's going to be another 20 or 40% or whatever of my number. So then you can pivot over to, okay, so let's talk about why is it, like what's going on? Is there any way we can shorten this? So I'm just thinking like insights, nuggets of insights, and then a plan. Okay, how do we help this person? So essentially you come on the same side of the table, but that starts with data-driven leadership and with the leader being hands-on and doing the job, right? Like it's not just a leader that sits with a dashboard and asks for reports about like, hey, what happened in the deal, what happens in the forecast. You actually need to do the work.
Yeah. I really like that answer. Okay, we're getting close to time. I've got one more question and then I want to touch upon Alfred one more time before we close out. If you could give sales leaders one rule to follow for the next 5 years, what would it be?
Obsess over execution quality and the early stages of the sales cycle and not just revenue. And I'll go one level deeper just to give a little bit of flavor on that. So I think if you obsess over the right behavior and the repeatability of the right behavior and making the day-to-day flow, because then you can coach the day-to-day, but you can't coach the revenue numbers. So basically you can't teach somebody to win 5-0, but you can teach somebody to do all of the activities that eventually lead to you winning 5-0. So you should spend all your time talking about top of funnel, pipeline building, and execution quality. If the execution at the front end of the sales cycle improves, results follow.
That's very much sales streams. Obviously we specialize in gamification, and so we specialize on focusing on top of funnel activities, and we have the same ethos of so many sales leaders we find come in and they're like, well, we want to run a competition on revenue, and that's an outcome. That's the end of the line. That's not something that you can really influence. The things that you should be influencing is the amount of meetings that you've booked or the amount of sequences that you've run or, you know, those types of activities that you have real influence over to get you to the ultimate revenue goal.
How do you coaching to leading indicators? That's the thing, because that's what you can do. That's what you can influence on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Last question. Give me a pitch on Alfred. Talk to me about Alfred. Tell me why we need to have Alfred in our lives.
So Alfred is essentially a ride along for sellers and leaders. It's a learning system with compounding context at its core. So for that to make sense, think about right now, sellers that are listening to this, they probably have 5, 10, 15 Chrome tabs open, and their brain is the context, like the API that shifts context from one tool to the other and makes all of these things create value somehow and then translates that value into customer messaging and meeting execution with the customer. Alfred is that context system that consumes all of this, that does tasks across all of these different tabs, and that helps the seller make them more efficient, essentially, so make them more productive. That's what we're building. So every new piece of information compounds the value of the system. The first things that we're doing right now is basically helping sellers build better pipeline faster. So we bring three things to the users: knowledge on what they should do, the habits, so the when they should do it, and then the skills, the how they do it. So we bring that into their revenue workflow. Knowledge, habits, and skills for sellers and sales leaders who want to be elites.
Amazing. I love it. A need to have. I really appreciate this conversation. Super illuminating and insightful. And thank you so much for your time and coming by and talking with us.
Thanks for having me. See you soon.